Welcome everyone to the Adaptavist webinar program for ScriptRunner for Bitbucket. Adaptavist, well, we make apps. We make ScriptRunner and a whole host of other apps for the Atlassian Stack, Trello, and Slack. Not on the slide yet, but it's true. And we're also a solutions provider who has worked with enterprise companies from all over the world to optimize their software application lifecycle and get the most return on investment out of their Atlassian tools and other tools as well. So that's a little bit about it. I mean, that's like scratching the surface. Adaptavist does a lot of stuff, but that's mainly what we do. We do it all over the world too. Global reach and support. We're everywhere that you want to be. I am based in New York, but we've got our home offices in London. We've got offices from San Diego, California to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and are ready to assist you with whatever your needs may be. So that brings us to why you're here today, to learn about ScriptRunner for Bitbucket. We're going to have a demo and a Q&A, and who's going to deliver these? Well, we've got two phenomenal software engineers on the call today. Excuse me, pardon me. Mr. Robert Giddings, who is the product manager of ScriptRunner for Bitbucket, and Reese Lander, the lead software engineer. So without further ado, I'm going to stop my screen share and pass it over to Mr. Robert Giddings to begin the demonstration. Robert, take it away, sir.
Well, thank you, Ryan. So I'll just share my screen. And can everybody see my screen okay? I'll just start presenting. Okay, cool. So the first thing we want to do is basically give a sort of quick demo over the sort of core functionality of ScriptRunner for Bitbucket. I know some of you might be evaluating the product and not be that familiar with it, so I think this is an opportunity really to sort of showcase what you can do with the product outside of the box as soon as you install it. So the first thing to think about is that ScriptRunner for Bitbucket is a complete tool set. You can customize, automate, and extend Bitbucket workflows however you want with the tool, and you don't have to worry about, creating your own app. So that's really the beauty of the product. It allows you to enhance standards, enforce standards rather for security and data compliance, which is particularly important if you're in a regulated environment. And I believe some of you are likely to be working in regulated environments on the call. And you can customize the UI, and we've got some demos coming up that will show you how to do that later on in the talk. And you can also do some backup and disaster recovery using the mirroring services and create some smart reports. And again, we've got some questions about that coming up later. The product, when you first install it, it's got over 40 sort of built-in scripts, jobs, event listeners, pre and post hooks and merge checks, which allow you to do a whole range of customizations with the product, which we're about to sort of show you. But the first thing to talk about, I think, is really that when you install the product, is really to sort of think about how you can use the product to make safer workflows when you're using Bitbucket. And what I want to show you is the recommendations that we put together to get really the best out of the product when you first install it. And I think the first thing to think about when you're thinking about your Bitbucket workflows is really to place security at the heart of your workflows. So you can do that in a number of ways using a number of hooks and built-in scripts using ScriptRunner. So the first thing you can think about is setting up some default project and repository permissions. So this means that from the outset of using the product, you can always trust that your projects and repositories have the permissions that you want to specify at a global level. You can also enforce trusted commit authors. So this means that every commit that's committed to your push to your instance, is by a trusted author. So again, this is particularly useful if you're in a regulated environment and you have to know where every commit's come from, and basically trace that audit. You can also set up mandatory reviewers and even a minimum number of reviewers. So again, the importance of this is that if you've got sensitive code and you need particular individuals to review that code, such as security experts, you can actually specify that they are mandatory reviewers, and you can also specify a minimum number of reviewers. So for example, that all code changes require at least two developers to review them, for example. And finally, when thinking about security, you can also set up the automation of withdrawing approvals on when a pull request has changed. So this makes sure, for example, that no code goes, creeps in through the cracks. So if a pull request gets changed because there's some comments that mean that code needs to change and you commit to added, the reviewers that originally approved that, that pull request, their approvals are withdrawn. The next thing to think about when setting up your workflow in Bitbucket is to think about an audit trail. Again, this is important if you're working in a regulated environment and you have to be able to trace back where, what decisions were made, where code was attached to a JIRA issue, say. And the three things that you can do in Bitbucket out of the box with this is you can enforce project and repository naming standards. So you can set up to say is that all projects and repositories must follow a certain naming pattern, and you know that from the outset, setting that up, and you can apply that across your entire instance. You can also do this for the branch and tags as well. This is particularly useful for naming and standard enforcement for branches, because you can, for example, specify that every branch must include a JIRA issue key in its name. And finally, you can require all commits to be associated with JIRA issues. So again, with that traceability, it means that you can basically look back through your commit history and always know which JIRA issue that commit was associated with. And finally, the last thing to think about when setting up your Bitbucket instance using ScriptRunner is to think about how you can further avoid future security risks. And you can use a couple of tools we've got inside ScriptRunner for Bitbucket out of the box, which the first one is you can schedule an automated job that will basically deactivate users at the time they should be deactivated. So this means that at a point a user shouldn't have access to the system, they won't have access to the system. So that's one way of enforcing security, which I'll show you later on. And then a relatively new script that we've added is that if you have users that have been deleted from your Bitbucket instance, they might still, for example, have some old artifacts lying around, such as personal repositories. We have a new built-in script that allows you to basically view any orphaned personal repositories and then delete them if necessary for users that no longer exist. And again, I'll just show you that as well. So without further ado, I'll now move on to sort of demoing some of these sort of scripts that are in a test instance of ours. So this is my Bitbucket test instance. So as you can see, I've got a sort of test instance set up here. So if I go to the admin section, you can see I've got ScriptRunner already installed in the instance. And the first thing I'm going to show you is the event handlers that I've already specified and set up for this demo. So the first one I've set up is the default project permissions. If I go in and edit it, you can see that what I've set up here is to say that all projects that are created will have a read access for all users by default. But I've also said that I wish for the admin user to have admin access and any users inside the stash users group in this example to have write access. And again, here I've done the same with repository permissions. So again, you can specify for all repositories that are created that in this case, the admin user will be an admin and any users in stash users will have write access. The next event handlers I've set up that are listening to events is the auto adding of reviewers to pull requests. So in this case, I've set it up, and when you set up hooks and event handlers inside Bitbucket, for those that are not currently familiar with this, you can specify which repositories you want to specify the event handler for. In this case, I'm saying I want all current and future repositories, this to act on all future and current repositories when pull requests are created. And in this case, I've said I wish for the admin and reviewer users to be classified as basically added as mandatory reviewers on every pull request that's created. And the next event handler is to withdraw approvals on a pull request. So this one, again, is basically being specified to run for all current and future repositories, as all the examples are in my demo. What you also notice here is a lot of the built-in event handlers and pre-hooks, etc., have a conditions field. When the condition is blank, which it is for the case of for this demo, it means it will run all the time. But you can, for example, there's some example snippets here that say, for example, you would only want it to run if, for example, some C++ files have been changed inside the code commits. But by leaving it blank means I wish this hook to run every time.
Robert,
Yes.
so far in the events that we've looked at, there's no code going on. Is that you've set the event, you've told it what you want to include, and it just does its thing, yeah?
Yeah, so all of these are built-in scripts, yeah. So you can create, so what I've done here is you can see here all of the built-in events we've got. So for example, auto-adding reviewers, automatically configuring the delete branch checkbox is another example. Here you've got your default project and permissions and naming standard enforcement. But you could, for example, create a custom event handler. If I was to go and create a custom event handler, you could then write your own custom inline script. We do, so later on we will have some examples of that, creating some custom stuff based on some of the questions that have already been submitted.
Cool. Thanks, Robert. I just wanted to point out that the built-in scripts are powerful, quite powerful, and involve very little button pressing to get a lot of valuable work done quickly. Thanks.
Yeah, so everything that I'm demoing in terms of what you can get straight out of the box. So this is literally as you install ScriptRunner, and I talked about, thinking about security, placing that at the heart of your workflow, your audit trail, all those tasks are built-in scripts. So you don't need to necessarily know any coding knowledge in order to take advantage of them. You can take advantage of them the moment you install the product.
Which is not to say that people on today's webinar are not already familiar with coding. I don't want to discourage anyone from writing code. It's just we've done a lot of legwork for some important features right off the bat. Thanks, Robert. Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, and I guess the last event handler I've set up here is the naming standard enforcement, which for projects and repositories is very simple. I'm basically saying any upper or lowercase letters, but in the real world, you could have all sorts of regular expressions that you want to basically use to add, to enforce whatever naming standard you might have. And then moving on to the pre-hooks. The pre-hooks will operate when a commit is made. So basically they'll check to see if a commit should be made for those that are not familiar with pre-hooks already. So the main ones here are basically enforcing trusted commit authors. So this, for example, will basically it's configured again for all current and future repositories, basically checks to see is the user making the commit or do they actually have right access to the repository. So then it will basically enforce that and stop the commit from being pushed to the instance if they don't. So this is useful, for example, if a committer is trying to commit a commit of another author, so they might be trying to commit from another author who doesn't have access, and then someone else is committing for them. It's basically checking that the original author of the commit does have right access to a repository. And again, next couple of ones on here are naming standards. So this one here checks for the naming standards of branches and tags. And so, for example, here I've set up that a branch either has to be a feature or hotfix, named feature or hotfix. And in the feature example, I've also set up a regex, which means that regex matches to, for example, a JIRA issue key. So again, you can then have the mapping where the branch is always referencing a JIRA issue key and enforcing that. And by leaving the message blank, the default message is basically to highlight to the user what the regex pattern is that they need to name their branches for. But you could write your own custom message. And the final pre-hook I've set up is to require every commit to be associated with a JIRA issue. So in this case, set it up for all current and future repositories. And I say I'm going to search for issues inside it. I've got a linked JIRA issue application set up, and I'm basically searching all issues in this example that have a status of in progress. But in your particular needs, you might choose another JQL search that you're going to search for the issues that you're interested in checking. And there's a couple of checkboxes here that then say, for example, I want to exclude merge checks and I want to check every single commit, not just one of the commits inside the push. And finally, the merge check that I've set up, which I mentioned previously in the slides, is to say I want a minimum number of approvers. And in this case, as I said, is 2. So every line of code is then checked by at least, when a pull request is opened, you have to have at least 2 reviewers before you can merge in that pull request. So this then means that every line of code that's reviewed as part of your development process is reviewed by at least 2 developers. So with that said, I'm now going to sort of show you how some of these, now I've set up these hooks, and this is the administrative section of Bitbucket. Now I'm going to show you how some of them are actually used in, in person, as it were, or while you're using your development. So if I go to projects, for example, and click on create project, if I was to write a nonsense project name like this, which no one should really, really want in their instance, and click create project, you can see, or should have seen, that it came back with a name. It should have come back with the event handler. It should have come back with a, so it should have come back with this, but there seems to be a technical issue with that one. Oh, there we go. It's because I didn't type in the key at the same time. But what it would have done is, so it's coming up with another error. So when I did type in the key, so what it's come back with is to say the regular expression, it must basically be lower or uppercase letters. So now, if I basically make a non-nonsense real project name, it now creates the project. And when I go to create the repository, again, if I give it a nonsense name, again, it's coming back and saying, no, you must basically create it with lower uppercase letters. So now going forward and using a test repository that I've set up, what I'm going to do is show you some of the, basically the pre-hooks that will basically what the end user developer would see, that some of you may not be familiar with. So if I basically now try to create a new branch, so some of you may already notice that I've typed in new branch as the branch name, which I'm anticipating isn't going to work because that doesn't follow what we previously discussed about branch names having to be called feature / JIRA issue name. And if I also now add a file, which I'm going to commit, but what I'm going to do is basically commit it as an invalid user. And the reason why I'm doing this is to show you what happens if the basically an invalid user who doesn't have access to Bitbucket, why it won't allow you to commit that for that user. And I'm also going to basically add an invalid message. So an invalid message is one where it's not referencing the JIRA issue in this case. So now if I try and push, so now you can see that this is now ScriptRunner for Bitbucket working, and you can see the first thing it's told you, which is preventing the commits from being pushed, is to say that the branch name new branch doesn't match the required naming pattern. In this case, for example, being feature / a regex, and the regex being compatible with a JIRA issue key. So the first thing I need to do is basically now rechange my branch name before the commit can happen, or push can happen rather.
Robert, while you're typing, I'm just going to point out that there was an interesting chat in the chat and around project level configuration. And Reese has included a link in our chat. If project level configuration is something you on the call are interested in, there is a link that Reese has provided. Please let us know. Vote.
Cool.
Thanks, Robert. Go ahead.
Nice. So now I've renamed the branch. Hopefully now if I now push again, it will come back and say, but it won't report the error with the branch name, hopefully. But what it should do now is basically now it's reporting 2 new errors. So this time it's stopping because the commit message didn't reference any Jira issue, and that's a requirement that we set up. And it also is basically saying that the user invalid user doesn't have right access repository. So again, it's not allowing me to make that commit. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the user of the commit. And this time I'm going to basically make the commit myself because I do have access to the the Bitbucket instance. I'm not going to change the message just yet to show you what should happen. Now if I push, you can see that now it's not complaining that I'm an invalid user, so it now believes I am a valid user trying to make the push, but it is still saying that the commit is not associated with any valid Jira ticket. So again, what I'll do is I will amend the commit. And this time I will change the commit message so it is associated with a Jira issue. So here you can say JRR-1 is my name of my example Jira issue. So that's now the new message. And if I now push that commit, you can now see that the push has come back and no warning message has come back. And in fact, now if I go to Bitbucket, you can see that the new branch has been created. If I click into the branch, you can now see the commit has been made, and also that commit is associated with a Jira issue. So you've got all of that, basically that auditing in place. And also the security worked kind of when I was trying to make the push, and now you've got the auditing here. And the next thing to look at is if I now want to create this, so I've made this change and I now want to create a pull request. So when I create the pull request, the first thing you'll notice is that the reviewers, admin and reviewer, have been added, and they've got padlock symbols, which means that they're required. And so again, this is what we set up when we said is we wanted admin user and reviewer user to be added as mandatory reviewers. And I'll now create a pull request. And this is created pull request. And again, the first thing you'll notice here is a warning, and the warning message is basically saying you still need 2 approvers before this pull request can be merged. So again, that was when we set up the minimum number of reviewers. So we always say we need 2 reviewers to approve the pull request. But first of all, what I'm going to show you is I'm going to sign in as the admin user and approve the pull request. So you can see I'm now signed in as the admin user. I've got the open pull request, which I'm now going to approve. And that's now approved, and the message has basically been updated to say you still need 1 approval before the pull request can be merged. But what happens if, for example, I make another commit? So let me add a second file. This time I'm just going to shortcut and do everything properly, so I won't get any error messages. So I'm giving it a proper commit message. And this time, if I click on commits for the pull request, you can see the second commit's been made. And now if I go to the error message, it's still saying 1 made. But also you can see that basically it's also saying that the admin user is unapproved. And they are unticked now, and they're unapproved. And actually it's saying that two approvers are still needed. So it unapproved the moment I made that second commit. So that is showing the development workflow. And the final thing I'm going to show is that after a while, you might have some things that you want to tidy up. So this is really the third section of the slides I showed about what you can do to keep your instance in a tidy format. So what you can do is you can go to script jobs, and we have some built-in script jobs. You can, again, make custom scheduled jobs if you want to do some inline coding. So there's an inline coding box that allows you to write your own custom scripts. But the one we do have that's built in is to deactivate users. And one here I've set up is to say I want the user Robert to be deactivated on the 1st of July. But what's also nice about it is I can actually also run that now straight away, which is good for the purposes of the demo, to say I want the user Robert to be deactivated. So I can run that now, and it says the user Robert has been deactivated. And if I go to the users section of Bitbucket, click on the user Robert, you can now see he's unlicensed. And then let's say I completely delete the user Robert from the instance altogether. So now deleting the user Robert, completely removed from the instance altogether, but the user Robert had his own best personal repository, but that's now kind of hanging around. That's kind of dead in the system, and there's not an easy way to clean it up. But what we recently added was a built-in script, and where built-in scripts are basically sort of one-time tasks that you can run. So you can do things like viewing repository size reports, but in this case, I can go and view and delete orphan personal repositories. So if I preview this, you can see that there is still, for the owner, R. Giddings, who is Robert, who is the user I deleted from the instance. See, it says Rob's personal repository. When I click on that, you can see that exists. It's just an empty repository at the moment. But what I can do is I can say, right, I want to do a cleanup. So I can delete the orphan repository, click run. And now it's telling me it's deleted the repository. When I click on this, I can confirm the repository has been removed. It no longer exists. So that is the end of the demonstration. So I think now it's time to go on to questions and answers. So with that said, I'll hand back to Ryan.
All right, Robert. Cool stuff, man. Great security practices right out of the box with ScriptRunner for Bitbucket. Very cool. Thank you for the thorough demonstration. So let's head back to the slides. Whoa. And now it's time for question time. All right. So from Sanjita, when we use the ScriptRunner plugin, it makes applications slow to load, specifically for remote locations, as the plugin makes batch.js size a lot bulkier. How do we fix it, guys?
Well, Ryan, I looked at this morning. So as Rob was demonstrating, there's lots of cool and interesting features in Bitbucket. And some of those depend on us including JavaScript into Bitbucket pages to augment functionality. It looks like some of these pieces of JavaScript are a little bit larger than they ought to be. So we need to reduce the size of those. We've created a backlog issue to address this, and we're going to do some investigation shortly into how to do this. So I'll post a link in chat to the bug or backlog issue for that for people to watch.
All right, so we don't have a specific solution yet, but it is something we are aware of and will be taken care of. And please, if this is something that you're looking at, Robert has added, or Reese has added a link into the chat window of Zoom to check out that bug. All right. From Nelson Jordan, heard that name before. Does ScriptRunner for Bitbucket give the ability to view PRs, pull requests, across repos? And can you give the ability to view pull requests based on roles?
So out of the box, no. But there's lots of features in ScriptRunner that could be used or leveraged to build this functionality yourself. So the script fragments feature we have, which allows you to add custom UI elements in JavaScript, could potentially be used to add a custom section to the UI that shows a list of pull requests. You could go further with that. You could add custom JavaScript to enable filtering, or perhaps you could add custom JavaScript to the existing pull request pages to do some kinds of filtering on the UI there. We have an upcoming question that relates to script fragments, so we're going to show some demos of similar functionality.
Okay, great. Fantastic question,
Yeah,
Nelson.
I think that question was the question might be on the slide before. There's might be a question on the slide before. I think you might have missed. Yeah.
Oh, I did. I skipped 2 slides ahead. I didn't even realize it.
I handled that perfectly, so.
So Nelson asks, can you create a role or ability to have folks create repos without being project admins?
Yes, you can, and I'm going to demonstrate how.
All right, let me stop sharing so that you may begin. Go for it, Reese.
Right, so for those of you who are unaware, the context for this is that in Bitbucket, by default, there's a project role there's a project creator role that you can assign to users. This allows a subset of users to create projects without being a global administrator or system administrator. Unfortunately, the same doesn't exist for repositories, so you can't have a subset of users that can create repositories. The only way to allow a user to create a repository is to make them a global administrator or a project administrator. Now, you might not necessarily want to make somebody a project administrator because then they have full reign over all repositories in that project. So the feature request that I'm showing here for Atlassian is a way to allow a subset of users to create repositories without being a global administrator or a project administrator. Now, out of the box, ScriptRunner doesn't have this feature, but we have the tools available to implement it yourself. So I'm going to demonstrate an example of how that can be done. So I'm starting off with a working example, and then I'll go backwards and show how I got here using ScriptRunner. So this is a project in Bitbucket, project 1. I'm logged in as a user that doesn't have project administrator permissions. So on the left-hand side of the menu, there's no project admin section. They're also not a global administrator, but just a standard Bitbucket user. But what you'll notice is in the top right, they have a create repository with ScriptRunner button. Now, when you click on this, it opens up a modal. And here you can put in a repository name, hit create, and you're redirected to a created repository. So the illusion is this looks like native functionality. Where did it come from? And the answer is I built it with ScriptRunner. So this is all based on script fragments. For those not aware, script fragments is a feature which allows you to customize the Bitbucket user interface, be that adding custom UI elements, perhaps hiding UI elements, and you can also do things like add JavaScript to different Bitbucket pages to augment existing functionality. So in this case, I've got a couple of things. The first thing I have is a custom web item. So I'll edit this. Now, web items in the Atlassian ecosystem are essentially links or buttons. So it's a link or a button that appears somewhere in the UI that Atlassian has predefined. In this case, it's a button that appears on the project overview screen. So there's a section. What section should this go in? It says project repositories headers. It's got menu text. That's the text that appears in the button. It's got a condition, which I'll show you in a second. And it's got to do what action. And this says run code and display a dialog. Well, what does that mean? Well, how this works is below that option, there's a link. This is a link to a ScriptRunner REST endpoint that I've pre-created. How this works is when you click on the button, that REST endpoint is called and it returns HTML, which contains that lovely modal that you saw for entering a repository name. So by linking these two features together, you can create something that looks almost like native user interface. So this bit of configuration creates the button. Okay, how do we make the button do something? The answer for that is REST endpoints. So in here, I have a custom REST endpoint, which I'm going to edit. Actually, this one's configured as a file. So I've just opened up our lovely script editor, which contains the REST endpoint code that I'm using. I'm not going to dive too deeply into the code. I will link to a Git repository that has all the code examples. But essentially, this is a standard ScriptRunner REST endpoint. It has two methods in it. One is a get, which returns some HTML for the dialog, which is what happens when you click on this button. Another is a post, which is what is triggered when you actually click the create repository button. And the thing that links these two things together is JavaScript, which is configured as an additional script fragment. So down here, I have a web resource. If I edit this up, open this up, I've supplied a context, which is how you tell Bitbucket which pages you want this JavaScript added to. So I said Bitbucket page project overview. That is the page I was showing you over here, which is where the repositories are listed. And I've included a link to createrepository.js, which is some custom JavaScript I've written, which is within a script root in ScriptRunner. So again, I won't dive into the code. It's very simplistic. It uses Atlassian's own JavaScript APIs to get project information, and then it uses Atlassian's jQuery to send REST requests to the REST endpoint, which we created prior. So tying it all together, there's a combination there of script fragments allowing you to augment Bitbucket UI and REST endpoints, which allow you to do custom code running on the back end triggered by those UI interactions. And for those interested in going a bit deeper into this, I've got a Git repository with all the sample code in, some screenshots of how to configure it, and that can be used as a starting point for building further stuff.
Nice, Reese. Thank you so much. And you're going to link to that Git repository in the chat of this Zoom. If anyone happens to miss it, feel free to reply to the email that you get from us after this webinar is over, and we'll make sure that we connect you with any resources that you might have missed, and that we'll hook you up. What I'm trying to get at is we'll help you out. All right, let's get back to the questions. But not Nelson's questions, of course. All right, we good on the slides? Can we see the questions again?
Yep.
Yep, great, okay. All right. A question with no name. We have 2 Bitbucket instances, and we want to sync everything from one repo to the other instance, including pull requests. Can you use ScriptRunner for Bitbucket to synchronize repos between Bitbucket instances, data, and metadata? That's a good question.
Yeah, so there's 2 aspects to this question. There's data and metadata. And of course, it depends on what you mean by data and metadata. So data sounds like Git repository data. So in ScriptRunner for Bitbucket, we have some functionality called mirroring. Effectively, what that allows you to do is clone a remote Git repository to Bitbucket server in a read-only fashion. Multiple reasons for doing that. Perhaps you want a backup to some degree, or you have a cloud repository that you would like mirrored to a local server that's closer to you geographically, so it's faster to do clones and stuff. Another justification. That feature is purely about creating a read-only clone of an external repository. What this question then goes on to talk about is metadata, so stuff like pull requests, which may exist in a remote repository. And there's nothing built into the products to facilitate that. But as we've answered with other questions, there are features which you could leverage to implement something like this. There's complicating factors. So for the simple case of I have 2 Bitbucket server instances, I could start off by setting up mirroring. That would give me a read-only clone of a remote repository. If I then want to have pull requests mirrored between those 2 things, you'd have to start diving into custom coding. So what we would suggest is perhaps a custom event handler on the remote server, listening for events such as pull requests created. That could then be used to trigger the Bitbucket REST API on the server that's mirroring and create the pull request there. That's something you could do. There's complicating things there, like how do you handle if an update is made on the other server? Do you reflect it back? And then you get into all kinds of things like, do I need event handlers on either side? What happens if there are conflicts and stuff? So it's not a simple thing to solve, and that's partly why it's not in the product. We have had feature requests for bidirectional mirroring of Git data, and that's something we do have on the backlog to look at. But for metadata, such as pull requests, it's not something we're planning to add to the core product. But of course, we can assist with the custom scripting features in the product to make that happen if you want to.
Nice, thank you. Robert, did you have something there?
No, I was just going to sort of say what Reese has kind of said. Yeah, it's with ScriptRunner for Bitbucket, there's sort of world's your oyster in terms of what you can do with custom coding, and the more, I guess, the more comfortable you feel with custom coding, the more you can really do with the product. As Reese demoed with the previous example on creating the repositories, and again, this would be the same thing. So with a collection of event handlers and various components, and in some ways, I sort of see ScriptRunner for Bitbucket as like being a sort of toolbox and some raw components rather than necessarily the finished features. Well, I mean, we've got the built-in scripts that I demoed earlier, but you can do so much more than just what the built-in scripts are. Once you get comfortable with writing your own custom scripts, you can pretty much do whatever you want with the product.
And for those who are interested in learning more about custom scripts, writing Groovy scripts, we have some resources for you on adaptavist.com, and as well as some more webinars coming up. We're actually doing a Write Your First Groovy Script webinar, but we'll talk more about that later. You can always find that information on adaptavist.com. Now let's see if I can get to the next question without skipping a slide. Technology. All right. JK asks, how to leverage ScriptRunner for Bitbucket to facilitate migration to Bitbucket server or repository mirroring. Is that something we've go ahead, guys.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to the previous question in that it relates to mirroring. So I interpret this question as them moving from perhaps a cloud Git provider of some fashion, maybe Bitbucket Cloud, maybe GitHub or GitLab, and then migrating to Bitbucket server. Or maybe they're migrating from another Bitbucket server instance. There's lots of ways you could cut that. And they're asking how you can leverage ScriptRunner for this. And they've mentioned mirroring, and mirroring is a natural choice. Internally at Adaptavist, we had a case recently where we did exactly this. We transitioned a product to a different company as part of an acquisition, and they used mirroring between two repositories whilst that transition was ongoing. So the company that acquired the team had a read-only clone of the acquired product for a period up until the transition occurred. So you can use the mirroring functionality to set up read-only clones until the day that you're ready to switch over, and then turn off mirroring, make the other repository not read-only anymore, and that's a way you can facilitate migration. There's also other things like perhaps if you're going, this talks about Bitbucket server. If you're going from Bitbucket server to Bitbucket data center, there's data center migration, which is something that ScriptRunner has limited support for. So that's another thing that can be done. And I think a primary thing that you would use is repository mirroring. If you're coming from a different provider, not another Bitbucket server instance.
All right. All right, Aditya asks, is it possible to get an overview of the private repos and their size details?
Yes, it is. Yes. So what I can do is I can share my screen again and show you. So it's one of the built-in scripts that we've got. So if I share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, or not. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you can see my screen. So this is again is the list of built-in scripts. In fact, actually here you can see some of the mirroring scripts that we've got that we've been previously mentioning in some of the previous questions and answers. But the one that I want to show for this one here is your repository size report. So when I click run the repository size report, what it does is it comes back with basically a list of sort of some pie charts showing some of the repositories and the sizes. So in this one here, you can see the test project is basically a size. Well, at the moment it's very small because this is just a demo of 1.8 kilobytes. But obviously, I mean, it would show you what your different projects and repositories are. And I can even go into the test project, for example, and in test project, so the project administrators themselves have access to some of the built-in scripts. And one of the built-in scripts that a project administrator has access to, again, is your repository size report. And again, if I run that, again, it's giving me back the data specifically for this particular project. And you can also export that data as a CSV. So yes, and actually, and also using the custom coding. So again, we talk about ScriptRunner being customizable, or you could, in theory, write your own reports. You could have create, again, using script fragments and REST endpoints, you can create scripts that basically generate their own reports if the built-in reports aren't sufficient enough. So I'll stop
nice.
One.
All right. So in the chat, Eric has asked for links to the Groovy information, and I am digging that up. I do ask your forgiveness. I announced that we're doing a Groovy scripting webinar that has actually not gone live yet. The invite to that is not out, and it won't be until Monday of next week. That's my bad. So we will follow up with anyone who's interested in that. But I have some more things for you, Eric. We'll make sure you get hooked up. Aditya asks, again, does that include private repos as well, or only repos in a particular project?
So the overview screen should include all repos, including private repos, I believe.
Yeah, my understanding is that it should include all repositories. If that turns out to not be the case or something's not quite working for you, please get in contact with support.
Great, great. All right. So let's head back to the slides. We can wrap, and if anybody wants to hang out for longer, we are more than welcome to. I don't have anything going for the next 10 minutes, so I'll hang out on the Zoom and answer any questions I can. I don't want to speak for everyone on the call, but that's possible. Before we wrap up, I do want to let you know that we are doing another similar event with Reese himself again on the 14th of July from 3 to 4 BST. We're doing a question and answer session similar to this with Johnny Carter, Jamie Eklund, and Mr. Lander one more time. So you can register for that now. We'll provide that link in the chat. I believe Mr. Davey is going to drop that in the chat. So sign up, show up, ask questions. All right. So thank you, everyone, so much for your time today and your questions and your generous participation. We really appreciate it. I see that there is a message in the chat. Yep, there is. That's the message from you. So we really appreciate everyone coming and spending your time with us. If there are further questions, please respond to the email that you'll get after this. We will, of course, make this recording available and send some resources your way. But if there's anything we didn't get to that you'd like to know about, or some questions that maybe require a little more teasing out before we can answer them, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Adaptavist. You can also reach us on social at Adaptavist. And yeah, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. I'm going to stop sharing. We're pretty much done. But Eric, hold on a second. I'm going to hook you up. I told you I would. I mean it. All right. So in our documentation, there are some useful resources in working with Groovy. So I'm just navigating to our website now, and I'm going to grab that thing for you, basically. Every time I type our website name into my browser, it tries to go to Gmail first, and that is so annoying. All right. So, that was the next thing I was going to suggest, Reese. Good call. The Adaptavist library, after I dropped the link to our documentation, I was going to provide a link to the library. The library will give you working scripts that can easily be customized. And by looking through those scripts, you'll get some really cool insight into how we make ScriptRunner really fire on all cylinders.
If anybody's got any scripts they'd like to see added to the library, please let us know, because then we know what people are interested in and what they want to see in library.
All right, so I'm going to include a link to our documentation here. Hey, thanks, Jeff, so much. Thank you so much for being here. All right, that is just our documentation, which has a really heavy amount for ScriptRunner for Bitbucket. But if you click on Adaptavist ScriptRunner in the corner, you're going to see all of them. Under Adaptavist ScriptRunner for Jira, there is a whole section of tutorials, which are going to show you. This is not going to show you like the deepest and most robust series of Groovy coding, right? But it will definitely give you an overview of some of the things you can do, and has some code examples in it as well. It's as good of a starting place as any. Again, I apologize for not having the for teasing early the Groovy scripting webinar. That was my bad, and I'm probably going to hear about that later. But we'll just let that. We'll just say that. We'll just laugh about that ourselves, right, guys? Right? Maybe we'll chuckle about it, or not. So to those of you still hanging out, if there are any further questions, please, now's the time. If not, we're going to wrap this one up. All right. For Robert and Reese, I'm Ryan. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Yeah,
And we'll see you next time. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say thanks, guys, for joining us. I hope
Yeah,
you
thank you
guys
all.
found it really informative.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.